Hey everyone, let me get myself up here on the screen. Can everybody see me? Can everybody see my face? Welcome to everybody. Welcome to wherever you're watching. I'm gonna mute myself from another. All right, everybody. I welcome to everybody who's here. I'm gonna put myself over here, split screen here. So this is if you are seeing the comments, wherever you're seeing the comments I've got in here, welcome to all of you wherever you're seeing me. Let me know if you can still see me. It looks like it's just me over here, but please do come back and watch this. Please do share this. This is when I conceived this was supposed to be this long live festival summit. Still will be. Definitely will be in 2022. But I still wanted to come here with you today and start what will be the beginning of me coming back to these different channels live and with video content and with audio content. Those of you who are streaming on the Patreon live stream, when you log off of here today, there's already some wonderful content that you can access. For those of you who are like, Patreon, what is that? So Patreon is one of the many ways that you can give a monthly donation of any kind to support work that you like. What that supports here with myself, Kristen Jeffers, and the Black Urbanist, as well as my new craft and art platform, Chris Pattern, is it supports me doing these kinds of webinars. It supports me teaching these kinds of webinars. It supports me bringing in guest speakers. It supports me being able to sustain the work. And just so happens, grant cycles change, tastes are fickle. If you really like what we're doing here and you have the means, please consider becoming a patron. That is going to be scrolling down at the bottom of the screen, and I will put the links in. And also, YouTubers, look down here. There's a lot of content. The folks who have sponsored me and sponsored this work, and this is just the beginning. We've got a couple other planned events, and there will be other surprises that'll sprinkle through. Also, if you sign up on Patreon, you'll hear from me at least in your email every day with either an audio or video message. So please do consider signing up. So what are you signing up for? So let me get to the main event here. Let me make this presentation a little bit bigger. All right, so you're going to see mini me over here on the side of the screen. You're going to see the big presentation. What I wanted to call this was, and I went through a lot of titles. Those of you who've been with my work for all 11 years, or at least been tangential to the work, I feel like this is the first opportunity I've had to really just stop and say, this is what I actually do, and this is how it happened. Even in the midst of last summer, I felt like, okay, well, people know, when you Google the words Black Urbanist, eventually you click around and you find me. In the early days, I was afraid of showing my face. And so today, I want to, affirm showing my face. I want to affirm what it looks like to be an urbanist in this body. And I want to encourage you, yes, you, especially if you are a member of a marginalized group, if we share membership in the same marginalized groups, and if you are even as an ally or accomplice, just really think about what it means to be supportive and to be helpful. And so I go through seasons a lot, when I'm there, when I'm not there, when I'm not sharing. But today I wanted to at least come back to the internet. I wanted to come back to my YouTube page. It's been sitting there. Shout out to the person who found the YouTube page, even though there's barely been anything placed there. Shout out to those of you who are still patrons. Shout out to those of you who sponsored pieces of this. We're going to talk about some of the other events that are coming up. Some of those you've seen in emails and you've seen alluded to. But if you are here watching for the first time, those of you who are registered, those of you who are in all access, all of you all, welcome. So what are we doing here? So I'm defining myself for myself, and I will be including the entirety of that quote. Get ready for that after I talk through kind of where I've been and what I'm doing. There are both of my Twitter handles there, so some of you may follow an Instagram handle. Some of you have been with me with this urban design work for a long time. Some of you are getting to know Chris Pattern. Both of them have existed for at least 5+ years. I'm not new to any of this work. That's another reason I wanted to go ahead and establish it. I do have this platform. A lot of folks, another thing I want to address before I get into the main presentation is a lot of folks have asked me, why don't I partner with X Black organization or Y Black organization? Why don't I partner with a university? Why don't I partner with a school? That's all well and good, but there's not a guarantee that there will always be mission syncing, especially when it comes to this particular content. We are still struggling with the word feminism. Of course, I'm looking here and seeing this horrible typo. Give me 1 second here. Let me add the I back. Oh dear, things are going. So let's just go ahead, and this is a good place to bring myself up here. Yeah, so I would love to have partnerships, of course. I would love to talk with you, and I would love, of course, to continue to raise money so I can have a proofreader so I don't run into these things on my slides. Many of you are like used to, okay, we don't start until it's ready. We don't start until it's done. But this is literally the life that I live and have lived, and all the things I discovered, and centering that concept back in our design work and doing the same for yourself. I want to challenge everybody, as you're hearing my story and you're hearing the why, and you're wondering why not partner, or at least you might see yourself as a partner now that you're watching and you're understanding where I'm coming from. But basically, this is me. I'm going to show you another side of this building that I'm sitting next to in a moment. This is probably from earlier this calendar year. Of course, I want to honor all of those who are still here in the midst of this pandemic and how insane this pandemic has been. This has asked us to access a lot of things. This has asked us to think through a lot of things. This has asked us to say, well, what is possible? And am I doing everything that's possible for me to do? So I'm Kristen, as I have here on the page. And let's see here. Go to. All right. So hopefully everybody can hear me. Hopefully you all can see me. Hopefully I'm not making too many weird faces over on the side. I'm over on the other page so that I can scroll through these slides. So there's my eye here. I am a Black queer feminist urbanist. We're going to break down each one of those definitions and how I apply them to myself, but I'm a firm believer in intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw and other Black feminist scholars who have applied this concept. Of course, I'm bringing this concept to the urban design profession. As you all can probably hear in my voice, and some people will go ahead and say, oh, well, I don't hear it. It's so fast. But yes, born and raised in Greensboro, North Carolina, also currently living in the Maryland suburbs here in the DC metro area. So may pick up on some of that. Have also lived and worked in the Kansas City metro area and the Baltimore metro area, which for my own purposes, they're the same. okay, don't stop, don't come at me, people here in the DMV. I know that there are key distinctions, but as someone who has moved here and come here and interacted, especially on the political level, but I'm very well aware, and that's another reason I wanted to define myself and I wanted to center myself and my identities in this work so you all understand that I'm not just coming to this thinking, okay, I don't connect with these communities. I don't understand the nuances of the Black community. Why don't you want me? Why, like, or if I come into a community space and I realize that I don't have the exact cultural competence, the regionalisms in place, I want us to also center regionalisms in the work that we do. I don't want us to always assume we need to go get someone from outside. I'm glad to be your outside coach and cheerleader, but I also am most happy when I get to work at home. And clearly, I'm working from home right now. I'm happy when I get to do those things. Uh, so, all those areas, from eating the things that I've eaten, and food's a big part of what I need to define myself, as you'll see in a future slide, as well as just the politics, the local government, the local governance. I keep up with all of that, not as much as I used to. And of course, I can't keep up with all of it because that's already 4 different metro areas with all these different jurisdictions. That is overwhelming. I want to establish today the need to not be overwhelmed. Also, apologies if anybody picks up any of the lawnmowers. Of course, as I mentioned before, my life is still kind of work from home. So how I show up in the world. I want to. Some of you may be watching this who are sitting with me on that stage. Some of you may remember me. This may have been the first time you met me when we were in Vancouver for what's now Walk Bike Places, way back in the fall of 2016. So literally almost 5 years ago to the date. I'm standing on the stage. I too am making Trump jokes. Of course, now we know that this was definitely, that whole situation was not a joke, and we're still suffering the repercussions. But normally, I'm a writer, I'm a fiber and graphic artist. So you'll see my, I did not make this sweater today. People ask me this all the time. Did not make the sweater, but I do make sweaters like it. The graphics, the choice of word, typography and everything, I'm very well involved in that. And this is one of many stages you may have seen me on over the years. And of course, if you really want to go digging, if you go on to my given name, Kristen Jeffers, if you go to that YouTube channel, I have a whole playlist of all the times I've spoken to various crowds over the last few years. My first major speech being way back to APA Virginia's Diversity Committee in 2014. Um, and oh dear, like, I usually show up at corporations as like a formal trainer. I also am trained as both a communicator. One degree is in communication, my other master's degree is in public affairs, with a heavy emphasis on public administration, community development, and economic development. Both of those I obtained at UNC System School. So once again, a lot of the perspective is very much being a Black person, a person of African descent that's descended from folks who accumulated themselves in North Carolina. But this is normally the way I show up in the world. Speaking of that formal training, how in the world did I come to call myself the Black Urbanist? Why is that in the corner of your screen, even with me over here on the side and, over here? Uh, in 2010, during my formal graduate school training in public affairs, I was already writing and blogging a lot. I've been writing since I was 6 years old. Literally, I got invited to the very same campus I was doing my graduate work in as a 6 year old. Actually, no, I think it was 7. I was 7 at this point, a 7 year old young writer of promise. There was a citywide writing contest. I wrote this children's book called Apricot's Reserves Goes to a Birthday Party. There is a sibling book, Strawberry Jam Takes a Walk. Strawberry Jam Takes a Walk was entered in the contest the year before. I was in the first grade. In the second grade, my book, Apricot Reserves goes to a Birthday Party won. I have a bottle of apricot preserves, which is in the canned fruit family. Those of you who have not gotten so artisanal during this pandemic that you don't know about all the fruits that you can can, this is one fruit you can can. It actually was sold on the shelves. Those of you who we share a regionalism do know about this. And so I had already written about the strawberry jam. And then I was like, well, let me write about another bottle of jelly. And jelly's living in a refrigerator, and jelly's taking a food train, and all these things. So I'd already been interested in all of this. I've also talked about how my father had me on the floor with maps. So I'll share that on another slide because I do address directly the family coordination. But it was the blogs and the communication I was encouraged to do from an early age through college, growing up and coming into the world in the early internet. Well, maybe not the early internet when it was just user groups and you had to type in special numbers, but definitely the era of AOL, Prodigy, dial up, moving into Roadrunner and the original high speed internet terminals. You still had to kind of be logged onto the wall. Um, Getting access to terabyte internet when I was on campus in undergrad in the early aughts, but then coming back to graduate school and pulling all that together and then just Googling and hearing words like smart growth and urbanism, and then realizing, okay, there's a handful of people. And I want to shout out to folks who are already getting tagged on Google with their thesis and their books around this idea of Black urbanism. Even though I didn't know as many people and I didn't know the people that I had tagged, I know both of them now. It's been a very big privilege to meet the folks that were using the words Black urbanism in print to be tagged on Google at this early stage. Absolutely, Black urbanists already had existed in life. You probably are one. If you're joining today and however you define Blackness, that's you, or being a person of African descent, or whatever identities you find yourself identifying by, you absolutely exist. But of course, and this is another reason I don't necessarily see, not to say I don't see my role in academia, but I don't see my role just in academia. Because we used to talk about so many land use issues, development, people having jobs, a lot of things that show up on the pages of like City Lab and Next City in relation to the health of our community and the health of the Black community in North Carolina, Black rural community, and of course, folks who have moved to cities that for many who grew up in places like New York City just look like, suburban accidents. But those of us who have been studying urbanization for a long time, whether formally or informally, we know that unfortunately urbanism is honestly sometimes in the eye of the beholder. Now, I have a definition. I'll show it in a moment. But for me, one of the first places that definition happened was at a kitchen table with this kind of grain of wood. That's where this concept first came into my life. Let me know, folks, if you can still hear me, if you're still with me. Looks like a few of you are still watching live. So thank you all for being here with me live. I definitely want to hear some feedback as we get closer to the end. Um, and so, yeah. And then let me address Black Lives Matter. It's something I have been involved with, at least tangentially. When I first heard these words, I'm like, of course. I actually saw the Facebook message and all the things, kind of like those of you who remember when Me Too really hit the internet. And I think it was Alyssa Milano who took Tarana Burke's words and really amplified them. But of course, now we know Tarana Burke, Alicia Garza, as well as several other Black feminists have really been working on centering, and not just and we say centering because for us that's just our lives. Like, a lot of things are created, and I know a lot of us, as we've been re-examining diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're finding that, oh well, we weren't following the Americans with Disabilities Act. Oh, we don't have enough people of a certain age. Oh, we assume things of a certain age. So even if you are a white cis male, you're going to run into things that you may realize, okay, well, maybe that's something I need to fix. And so last year was a special year in so many ways. And last year was exhausting. I'm going to go on the record. Some of you watching live, some of you may watch this later. Know that I appreciate all of you who stepped up, became part of this network and part of this work in 2020. But know that I've been at this since at least 2010. And this is today, my goal is to bring this together. And whenever anybody comes to this YouTube page, or if they become patrons for the first time and they see this video, they'll understand what I've been doing and how long it's taken and all. And if those of you who know movement work, know that movement work doesn't happen overnight, know that this will work. And just being a young millennial creator, a Black middle class person from the South, with all these different ideas of what it means to be a Black person. And then, of course, discovering all the gender and sexuality things about myself. So all these things are coming together. There's a lot here. So it's been 11 years of speeches, consulting on design teams, blogging, podcasting, and external articles. And I'll admit my arrogance at insisting, I definitely wanted to make sure that you all knew I was a Black urbanist. And I felt like it was my canon to let people know that that happened. Of course, now we have groups like Black Space, we have DAP, we have so many of our professional organizations have dedicated chapters. Obviously, NOMA has been force here, NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists, as well as the National Association of Minority Architects, COMPTO, I think it's either the Council or Congress of Minority Transportation Officials. There have been a lot of groups that are here, but not all these groups are really community facing, person facing. And say if you're sitting on the side of the road waiting on a bus that's never going to come, like, you don't necessarily interact, you don't necessarily know, even if you've been college educated, especially if you're in this deep in the science world and you're on it in all its acronyms, or if you're deep into like a literature, or if you're deep into some other discipline that comes with its own set of acronyms and initialisms and jargon and terminology, you may not think to say, okay, well, somebody planned to put this bus stop here. There was an actual purpose point, not, oh, I guess my mayor did it, or I guess the president did it. Those things that we run into when we don't necessarily think about where things come from, especially when it comes to things locally. Now, when I started in 2010, of course, I want to make this clear. This is something that is embedded, that is not up for debate. I know we're still struggling with how to talk about this, but for me, I've always known that I am, well, I won't say that I always know, because that's also for those of you who are in advocacy around the LGBTQ community. We don't necessarily always know, but it's always there for us to know. There is opportunity to find that part in us. And yes, depending on when you find that out about yourself, depending on when you let yourself explore these options around how you present yourself in the world, what clothing you wear, who you decide to date, who you allow yourself to date and be, all those things definitely change your perspective of how you think about things. One key way, both being a feminist, and and I'll get into the definitions in just a moment, but one key way of being a feminist has affected me is this definitely, as well as someone who is considers themselves outside of the Western gender binary, despite appearance. That's something I've chosen, but I could easily choose to look a different way at a different time. And of course, colonialism and discrimination and enslavement affect our ability to be seen and to be able to define ourselves in a certain way. So when finding this out, and when recognizing this, and when accepting this, and when you just saw me on that stage a few slides ago, I was starting the process of affirming this in myself 100% fully. Of course, the world's going to change. And when I don't need to worry about marrying at a certain time, or when I do decide to marry, if we do decide to have children now, I have to be mindful of, okay, who might carry, how will we adopt? The way you have this definitely affects the way you have children, with the emphasis on children and schooling and everything we have in the design world. This is absolutely a place where we have something to think about, consider, and even incorporate into how we design for human beings who happen to be of this identity, who happen to be of different ethnicities, who happen to be from different places. So screenshot this. If you don't get anything out of this presentation today or whenever you watch this is it. The world is different. Just like the world is different for you, the world is different for me. And if you're going to design for me and anybody that kind of is roughly like me, or any in period in general, just when you design for somebody else that's not you, know that their world is different, and just be mindful of the need to listen. So today, you're getting a taste of what it would take to design for me. But let's get into these definitions. Let me break this down. So this is how I define Black. I say often melanated because there are folks that who have albinism who do identify as folks of African descent. Um, Either directly or through ancestry to subject to enslavement, colonization or colonialism, discrimination or mistreatment, past, present, and unfortunately sometimes future marginalization, people planning to not to discriminate, which absolutely still happens. And of course, the cultures that come from having a shared experience of living within this body. There's, of course, a joy that comes from living in this body. There are gifts that come from those of African descent and the continent itself, but we've been through centuries and we continue to be through centuries. And this is a global thing. We sell worldwide. People are constantly lightening their skin. So even if they're brown, some people don't necessarily want to be brown. So I want to bring this up here in this United States, and of course several other countries, especially those that were subject to European colonialism. This concept of being Black wasn't always welcomed. Uh, Neighborhoods, mortgages, schools, advancement opportunities, just how Black or how proud or how confident can you be at any moment in time. Of course, I have a more open definition of this. Some people, and so there are folks who would consider themselves members of the LGBTQIA plus, and that also includes the 2S, Two Spirit, to honor those as we go into Indigenous Heritage Month here in the United States. Those who are in that community, and not every tribe considers it has a entity that considers itself a Two Spirit, but ultimately for me, this is how I identify this word: gender presentation, gender identity, a gender journey or relationship or a sexual orientation that differs from traditional Western colonial thoughts. Of course, now many will say, well, was given to us. This is a debate that comes up in the Black and very Black nationalist communities, that this is something that was given to us. But there's been evidence of multi-gendered identities, varieties in sexual expression, gender expression in all forms of our communities. And there's still a lot of folks who are closeted. There are a lot of folks who are not in a safe space to talk about this. And this is still a new concept for even folks that are in my own family, around myself, and in job places and job spaces. And of course, the cultures that come from, the exclusions, the differences, the way of looking at the world, just the way of being seen in the world. That's where I've set on this definition. Likewise, for me, being a feminist is you can be a feminist person of any gender identity, and you can be part of a movement, and it's not just feminine, it's any genders marginalized under a concept of patriarchy, but specifically those tagged as feminine and those outside of traditional gender binaries or a binary period. There This does get modified by race often. This does get modified by your gender and sexuality. It gets modified by region. It gets modified by ethnicity. I mean, all these things do affect how this particular concept influences itself. And finally, now this is one that if you're watching, you've been following me for a while, this is probably the one we all kind of come to. But I will say that you can't have an urbanist expression without a rural expression. I'll read the definition verbatim: a person in a movement that promotes the conglomeration of ideas, services, and objects in centralized locations, governed democratically, given freely and fairly, and connected by public transit. It's not mutually exclusive to rule, but it's the natural output of the natural and rural environments and the need to come together with human interaction. Now, all of these definitions are fluid, subject to change, but these are my working definitions as I craft my planning practice. These are my working definitions as I live in the world, as I process everything from COVID-19 to surviving as an entrepreneur, still growing their business, as to being on a project team, to being in local government and being like a thought leader. And it came down to this Audre Lorde quote: if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. Now, unfortunately, Audre Lorde is an ancestor at this point, but she's one of my Black queer feminist ancestors who I lean on a lot. And specifically, many of you have read this quote: though the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those, and this she does say women, but I have changed it to people who define the master's house as their only source of support. But I think it's key to think about this specifically for Black women, Black feminine people who are trying to encounter the world. This is why when I said I'm not necessarily opposed to partnerships with other entities, but will those other entities allow me to say the things that we don't always want to say? Will they allow me to grow and change? In some states, I can't even have this purple hair. So that is, this is why we're here today. So I can define those things. And so I'm going to revisit this photograph. I didn't make that skirt. And just a side note, those of you who want to join the Chris Pattern Art Club, that will be eventually a project we do. So just a small plug there for a new thing that I'm doing. But in the meantime, let's get into the meat of this, the things I personally need to define myself and the place that I live. Number one, a workplace of any kind. It could be, from been a barista, I've been in nonprofit offices, I've worked at a Dairy Queen, I've worked, and I know people, of course, who work in warehouses, I've worked in all kinds of all the levels of government, corporate America. Basically, these places fund and pay fairly. They're inclusive and respectful of gender presentations and sexualities of Black people. Now, I'm already going to warn you, and just if you're not into this becoming a center that focuses on Black queer feminism, there's so many other places you can go that have a slightly different angle on Black urbanism, slightly different angle on the feminist city. But this is where we are. This is my niche. And for me, and I've witnessed it, I've seen this. Those of you may be familiar with other books. I'm personally reading Right Within by Amanda Hartz, where a lot of us talk about how our workplaces don't always give us enough room. Our movements don't always give enough room. And so one of the first things I need anywhere I'm at is to demand for this. And whether it's, and that goes for anything that I'm doing on a volunteer basis, whether I'm doing, anything I'm teaching, places I'm teaching, all these things, just this kind of respect. So you might have noticed the purple hair. That has been possible because I have a wonderful stylist who gets me and says, okay, we can do anything within reason. And so unfortunately, there are a lot of places that don't value very tight, kinky, curly hair. It's still taught in hair school that you should straighten your hair. Many of you all have started your careers or starting your careers, and depending on where you work, you may still hear stuff. The Crown Act is not legal in all 50 states, and there are countries that are not as accepting. There are places, people that don't understand. And because we don't have universal training, it's a premium to have this done. However, this is part of me. When the top of my head is right, everything else falls right. And of course, the top of our heads is one of the first things that signal to folks of our African ancestry. Many of you may be aware that in New Orleans, back in the time of where they were enslaved Africans and they were freed Africans. Oftentimes, freed Africans were still required to cover their hair with a scarf like this. Like they couldn't even have their hair out. It couldn't. The whole set of curls had to be covered with a scarf. These We are still wrestling with these things, and this is one place. And oftentimes, hair salons for Black people, barbershops the same, are often places where we get to be undeniably us. However, when we start to express elements of gender diversity, sometimes it doesn't always happen either. So, a hair salon that affirms my gender identity, that affirms my presentation, that does what I want to do with my hair, and that is reasonably priced, both for the person practicing the service as well as me needing to have this service done, or at least help with, styling my hair on a regular basis. Um, some of my favorite maker spaces here in the area. I at the little blue house on the top bottom corner. I'll be teaching one of my first yarn classes there. Um, the one I'm staying in with the paper shade dinosaur is one of our publicly owned museums here in the DMV area. The Fiber Space, one of my closest yarn shops, and then Creative Soupland, which is another government funded arts institution that's in the Prince George's, Maryland community. They're being able to have access to all this art, to have all this Black art, to have all these things. It reminds me that, at the end of the day, even when we're in hard times, we still find a way to create. And oftentimes it's that way of creating. It's those creations. Those things bring us to come outside and go places and stream places and everything. Sometimes my homesickness shows up in my belly. And if I can't find a good fish plate, if I can't find a Krispy Kreme, a Bojangles, or a Cookout, or all three, I do sometimes get itchy. Or soul food even. But for me, it's the fish is probably the hardest to find. I've definitely found it here in the DC areas. I'll highlight in a moment. But everything else is nice. It's definitely nice to have access to all those other things I've mentioned, even though I have to drive a little bit for the Cookout. Um, Having bookstores and libraries affirm my intersectional identities. And of course, here in the DC area, shout out to Mahogany Books and Loyalty Books that are Black and queer owned entities. Well, Mahogany Books is owned by a Black husband and wife couple. And then, of course, Loyalty Books is owned by a Black biracial queer person. I really am thankful that these are available. And of course, we are definitely in a different world than we were even back when I did the writing conference. The dream of being a Black author. Had the opportunity to meet the author, Walter D. Myers, on that day. But now people can meet me, or, all these, there's so many of us that are here, and just, there's so much room. And it's just a beautiful day that we have our books. If anything, I can at least find Barnes and Noble, and Barnes and Noble will at least order me titles by Black and LGBTQIA plus people. I need outdoor space. I need to be connected with nature. I'm literally, you might have seen me turn if you're looking at my little face over there, and I'm next to the window and just seeing all the leaf peeping, and we'll go out on the trails. Or, I'm an avid roller skater. I still do cycle. I do ride my bike. I need all of that. And I need it where, I want to shout out entities like Girl Trek and Outdoor Afro that make it easier for those of us to want to. I know the fan base around Patagonia, the environmental drag queen, like all these people that make it easier for those of us in non-cis straight white bodies to be out and about in the nature. And then, this little video, like, this is still a rare sight. This was a site that I didn't necessarily get to see growing up, because it's this thing that, in some denominations, is still not cool for cis women to be ministers. It's still not cool for lesbian queer people to marry. So just being in a faith community, a community that thinks about the mind, soul, and spirit, whether or not it's Christian or not, but it affirms who I am. It affirms the being that has been created. And it shows me in this being, with my partner and with family and friends, we all have a home. We can be affirmed. We can be in leadership, and our unions can be honored and blessed. And I know this is probably gonna be another side that shakes y'all up, but we're losing our bars that are specifically for feminine leaning people. We're losing our bars that aren't just there for drag shows or game watches. We're losing a lot of sober spaces as well in community permanent sober spaces. And those of you who are familiar with some of the protesting around Nelly's Sports Bar, that was the root of it. There's not a lot of permanent places anywhere that are there for communities of color that intersect with the LGBTQ identities, to be able to have spaces to process who we are, much like faith community spaces, but just in general, secular third places that we are allowed to be ourselves. And then, of course, places that assume that we have all this money and we have all this budget and we're not having pay equity problems or all those things. So, really finding somewhere and finding places. And my hope is that what I just did was highlight at least two or three places, like metro areas. They don't have it all because honestly, there are very few places in the world that have all these things. These things are growing, these are growth opportunities. So if you're seeing this slide today and you're feeling the kind of way about not having something like this, or you're like, well, how can I make my house of faith better? How can I make my workplace better? How can I support businesses that do have these characteristics, specifically in major metro areas that have a lot of people that would identify as Black women, definitely let me know. Because right now, Atlanta, Durham, and right where I'm at in DC are kind of the top three. There's definitely, and those of you who have been familiar, I've been doing some surveying. I can post those links as well. That's kind of what came from the survey, to these three areas. But there are about seven or so other cities that definitely have characteristics. There's smaller cities. And over the next few weeks, depending on when you see this information may be posted. But if you're watching this live today, or if you're watching it within the next week or so, this information will be posted and will be drawn upon. And it's also information that you can come to me for. But today is a call to action. It's a reclamation for my fellow Black queer feminist urbanists. How is the world that you are in serving you, and are you getting what you need and want in the world? The community I define for myself is also rooted in a call for systemic change, rebuilding of community structures. And this is for everybody. Does your vision for yourself, your abundance vision, your whatever communities you evolve in, does it allow others to be abundant and not just yourself, or even just people that share with you? I want to make this clear. We're not talking about only Black women getting ahead. We're talking about everybody getting ahead, but everybody getting ahead and being affirmed and loved. And we are not at an equity or even a parity in some of those spaces. And equality is not, even an equality is not being reached in some of these efforts to get this and to overcome this need for a rebuilding of systems and structures. Now, for those of you who share identities with me, I want to encourage you to triage yourself wherever you need to be. You may find support in a smaller city but you have people that affirm your identity. You may be able to own a home. You may have a decent paying job, or your business is being supported. Having that right community on board is necessary so you can be a healthy, healing part of that community. That's what I'm aiming to do. That's where, I take breaks. I listen to different things. After this, I'm going to probably log off. I do have another thing I've been working on, but I'm going to log off and rest myself and rest my body and rest my voice for the next thing to do. And so before I go and I end this first session today, there are two things I want to offer to you. If you are struggling with where to live and sorting through what's next with your life, I've been running my own business for 11 years. I've been in the professional world for 15. I've been analyzing cities and offerings and incentives and all these things for a very long time. I can help you. So that is my email. If you want to talk to me for a few minutes, I can schedule you. This is absolutely free. I know to get into this summit today, there are various levels of sliding scale. But for those of you who are Black Queer Feminist Urbanists, I want to hear from you. I want to know who else is out there trying to sort through this idea. I want to know who else is thinking through and wanting to know more about who they are and how they attach in cities. And also, this is available for you. And then everybody is encouraged. We're going to have more events with this summit. It's going to be a smaller summit than we had planned, but we do have 2 more special events. If you're on the Patreon page already, you don't have to necessarily pledge, but pledging is nice. But for at least the next 3 weeks, there will be a lot of free content for you to get a sense of what I'm doing, what I want to do, and what you can be a part of as you join our community over at Patreon. And then finally, um, 2 special events. Mondays are going to kind of be our day for the next couple of weeks. On next Monday at 7 p.m. with my partner Les Henderson, founder of Queer, and thank you especially to our sponsor specifically for our Health Week, Semaine Health. We're going to be showing a documentary, The Dominance of Motherhood. This is a wonderful program. There's going to be 2 parts. This is women who are perceived as masculine. Some of them identify more as butch or a stud, which is a Black community form of talking about feminine masculinity. And how they wrestle with being pregnant, how they, walk through the world, and just these will be women that you'll want to be aware of in your own community, that gender and identities and everything can be fluid and things can be different. So we're going to come together. My partner and I will be there to usher you in. And if you want to register specifically for this on Eventbrite, there is a donation button. And then, of course, we'll be talking with the creators. We'll be recording a conversation with the creators. So you can come back right here to the Black Urbanist YouTube page or wherever you're watching this, Patreon, wherever you're watching this video. This next week, we're going to have this live screening. And then the following week, I have a podcast just inside of Patreon called Public Lecture with Kristen Jeffers. Those of you who may be watching this because you missed my old podcast and everything and wonder where they went, all of my attempts to podcast live inside of my Patreon starting at the $10 level. And so the following week, we're going to launch my craft classes, and I'm going to talk through why we're doing this. The following week at 7 p.m. Eastern, I'll be playing a brand new created episode of Public Lecture with Kristen Jeffers with someone else who's familiar to both planning and craft. This will be exciting. I'm sure you'll enjoy this conversation. And it'll be right here on this YouTube page. It'll be in Patreon. It'll be everywhere that all this conference content will be able to stream. And so with that, I'm going to pull my whole face back on the screen. And thank you all. I see there are at least 5 people watching. I thank you so much for being here. Do encourage people to sign up on the Patreon. It is scrolling on the bottom of the screen for a reason. If you're on YouTube, there are links to the Eventbrite. It is not too late to donate. I think donations close out at the end of the day today. I'll be talking more about the Black Queer Feminist Urbanist School and our reboot that will actually reboot in January. I have a wonderful instructor I've been mentoring to come aboard for that. And I'll just be more present. You're going to see me on emails. You're going to see more videos of me. You're going to see more of this iteration of my face out and about in the world. So that is exciting to me. Now, I may not be here every day. I may not be here all the time, but I really appreciate all of you who are here live. I appreciate all of you who took the time to stream, to share, who may be curious, who may not get it, but at least you know where I'm coming from. And I am looking forward to future partnerships, future ways we can do this work together. But I do believe there is a need for Black queer feminist urbanism. So You all take care of yourselves. It's a beautiful day here for those of you in DC. Thank you. Yeah, Camille, thank you for joining me, and I will be in touch. One more thing, those of you who are part of the LGBTQ community and Black, that All Access Pass is open. We've had so many sponsors and scholarship givers. So if you're watching this video and you want me to help you, if you happen to go on the Eventbrite, see a price, all of that, email me, theblackurbanist@gmail.com. We're going to set up a time. We're going to set up a plan. And the nice thing about it is you'll also have a group of people that are in a little mastermind group to help with navigating, thinking through all of your intersectional identities, as well as comprehending the world together. So with that, I will see you on a different live broadcast. Have a wonderful afternoon.